introduce our speaker.
Hi, Marianne.
Hi.
Good to be back.
It's good to have you back, Bruce.
I need a microphone.
Okay. Well, Bruce is no stranger to DSA again. He is a friend of many here. He's been on several trips with many in our group, and he's known best probably for his devotional books and how much they blessed so many people. Recently, John and Steve, Steve went on a trip with the Damascus Christian students to Tetons and Yellowstone, and they shared the devotional books with the kids there, and they were having life-changing experiences, and many consecrated their lives to the Lord, and this devotional book, I'm sure, is going to enrich their life as it enriches ours. I'll just give you a little background for Bruce Malone. He is a former research leader for Dow Chemical with 28 years of science experience, resulting in 18 patents. But his passion for sharing the relevance and evidence for creation, but he has a passion for sharing the relevance and evidence for creation. So he retired early and became a full-time director of Search for the Truth Ministries. He has been writing and speaking extensively about creation for over 27 years. Bruce resides, now 35? Okay, we'll have to update this description. Bruce resides with his wife and 4 children in Midland, Michigan. So let's welcome Bruce Malone.
Thank you. Oh. It's really good to be back. Yeah, this is my 6th time to DSA, and when I first came, I thought, nobody's going to come on a Saturday morning to hear a creation talk. You guys are the premier creation group in the nation. Seriously, the highest attendance, the most participation. I love coming here. Now, in those 35 years, and I left my job at Dow Chemical, actually, it's coming up on 17 years ago now. Left at 49 and to write and speak and teach on creation. And I've watched our culture deteriorate since I became a Christian after college. So that's been coming up on 40 years ago. And it's just every decade it's gotten worse. You all know this. You've got grandchildren and friends and neighbors. They have no interest in creation in the Bible, and they think everything is explained without God. And I've kind of thought about it over the years. It's like it's not a bunch of facts about the evidence for creation that's going to turn people around. And why are people so disinterested in biblical truth in God? And that's what this talk is all about. And I kind of developed it with this thought. I think the root of the problem is, in our culture, the people around us, they've lost what I call the awe of who God is and what He's done. The absolute, overwhelming, stunning, emotional, and intellectual awe of who God actually is. And part of that is that life just beats us up. We live in a fallen creation, and every human being has a fractured, fallen nature with a bent toward disobedience and evil. Every single one of us. And even as a Christian, all of our lives, Paul said it best, the flesh fights against the spirit. We still have that flesh part of us. And every day we've got to yield to what God wants to do in our lives. But the other half of it is that for generations in the entire education, media, museum, internet system, everybody is being trained that you can explain everything without God. And at best, he's being left out, which means he's either irrelevant or non-existent. So this awe of who he is getting just trained out of people. Now, I want to start with a parable, a story, as I develop why this all matters, and then what can we do about it? Because if we're just here to get more knowledge, what good is that? But what can we do about this that's going on all around us? And it starts about 500 or so years ago with the Sistine Chapel, the little parable. Now, I want you all sitting here to imagine that you are the children of what is essentially the world's greatest artist, Michelangelo. And you're growing up, Michelangelo's your dad, and the Pope comes to him and says, I've built this new chapel and I want it to be the showcase of all history to God's majesty. And I want you to paint panels on the ceiling depicting biblical scenes of what God has done in history. Now, Michelangelo at this point in your life, your dad, he'd done lots of painting, but he really wanted to concentrate on sculpting. So he didn't want to do it, but you don't turn down the Pope. I don't know what just happened. Is there a way of bringing my slides back up? No, it's right here on my computer, the same as it always was. By the way, we went through 3 computers to try to get my presentation working. So I'm going to keep talking. These guys are going to help me out. Oh, there we go. Thanks. I don't know what happened, but maybe you can fix that. So anyway, so you have to agree. And day after day, week after week, month after month, you're saying, Dad, can we throw the ball and play? And he said, nah, I got to work late tonight. Got to get this done. Hey, can we go to the beach this weekend? Nope, I got to work all weekend. Year after year, it took him over 2 years laying on his back at the top of a scaffold, mixing paint with plaster to make a fresco to create this gorgeous work. And you resented it. You had no time. Your dad was too busy all the time. And you grow up and leave, and years later, your dad dies, and decades later, you decide, I want to come see what he spent all his time doing. So you join a tour group, and you come walking through the Sistine Chapel, and the tour guide's leading you along, and he says, this ceiling is a miracle, an absolute miracle. You see, decades ago, water started seeping through the ceiling, and it picked up minerals. And some of the minerals were blue, and some were green, and some were orange. And then pictures started to appear on the ceiling panels. And all by these random natural processes, these gorgeous paintings appeared on this ceiling. And everybody's just saying, wow, that is so cool. What's going to be your feelings in response? Think about it. You saw your dad do this. You knew the time and the effort. What are you feeling when you're told that? Anybody? Anger? Outrage? Disbelief? You're beyond irate because you know it's such a blatant lie. Now you understand, you all know exactly what I'm talking about. That's exactly what's happening all around us. Things that could not possibly be true because they're repeated over and over and over again, and generations have been trained to think it, and they're presented in a very credible way, backed by billions of dollars. Folks just assume it's true, and it's all they often get to hear. Now, I'm going to come back to that, but I want to start talking about, obviously, we're here to talk about creation. But I'm not going to spend my time in Genesis, the greatest creation book of the Bible, the foundation of everything. I'm going to go to the second greatest creation book of the Bible, and I'm going to spend the first third or so of the lecture this morning just kind of laying some groundwork for what comes next. And that is the book of Job. Now, Job, and I know most of you are very seasoned Christians, so this is all review for you. But for a few, it's helpful to do some review. I'm just going to summarize in a few minutes the book of Job. It's acknowledged to be the oldest book in the Bible for lots of reasons. It talks about things that show up nowhere else in the Bible. Snow and ice is mentioned more times in Job than the whole rest of the Bible combined. And there would have been an ice age immediately following the worldwide flood. The flood guaranteed there would have been an ice age on this planet because of lots of evaporation from warmer ocean water. So that's where the ice age fits in, and the book of Job refers to it. Now, there was never ice in the Middle East, only in the northern, southern latitudes, lots more rainfall worldwide for hundreds of years. It's why Israel was the land flowing with milk and honey at the time that Moses went into it. It's a desert now, except for irrigation. It's because it was the later periods of the Ice Age. Job also lived right around 200 years. Abraham lived around 200 years. Lifetimes continue to drop off. So I think this book was written in the 4,000 year ago range, shortly after the flood and the Tower of Babel. Now, it contains incredible scientific insights, and that's a whole lecture in and of itself that are found nowhere else in the Bible. More importantly, it addresses the issue of pain and suffering, because that's the other key. Life beats us up. People are dying of cancer, young children, financial problems, health problems, relationship problems, social problems, confused people where men think they're women and women think they're men and they don't even know any better. Just, it's crazy world we live in. And the major reason most people say they don't want to believe in God or they don't trust the Bible is that why would a good God make a world with all these things wrong with it? And this is the book that starts to look at that issue. And lastly, it provides this ultimate solution of hope. And that's what I'm going to just touch on before I get moving. Now, recap. Job was like the Bill Gates of the day, or Elon Musk of his day. Okay, this guy had 7,000 sheep. What do you do with that many sheep? How do you ride that many camels? What do you do with all those ox? He had all these servants. He was rich beyond rich, and he was a respected ruler of his city. And as you go through Job, he did everything right. But, okay, I'll come back to this. God allowed him to be tested. Does he just follow and love and obey God because God's given him all this good stuff, or is there something more? And God allowed it. So, in the midst of a wonderful life, he has 10 kids, 7 sons, 3 daughters. They all die instantaneously. Hurricanes, tornado just wipes them out, kills them all. I can't imagine the emotional pain. It's stunning. Anybody of you have ever lost someone close? Emotional pain physically hurts. And all of your children. And then all of his wealth is wiped out. All of his animals, all of his crops, everything is gone. And then I think he gets probably the worst possible painful disease where every inch of his body is covered with oozing, breaking, uncontrollably itchy, painful boils, to the point he's just scraping himself to cause more pain, so there's a relief from the pain that's all over his body, from the top of his head to the soles of his feet. And you get the feeling it's day after day and week after week, okay? So he's lost everything, emotional, relational, financial, and health. I think this man suffered more than any human being short of Jesus Christ, of any human that's ever lived, because it was all three at once. Okay, that's the picture. And in the midst of all this, there's 30-some chapters, if you skip the introduction, I think 34 chapters, of friends trying to convince him that, well, if you'd have just been a better person, if you'd have done things right, nothing would have happened. In other words, if you behave right, then you get salvation. If you behave wrong, you get punishment. It was a work salvation message. That was the final test. And Job refused to accept that as truth. And he refused to blaspheme God. But he did keep asking, why? I wish I'd never been born. This is so bad. Why is this happening? And in the midst of it, he makes these 2 statements that are just stunning, that I love. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is after this. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I'll leave. I can't take credit for anything. You've put me where I lived. You've given me my abilities. You've given me my skills. You've given me my wealth. Who am I to say you can't take it back? And praise be the name of the Lord. And in all this, he didn't blame God. And then one of my favorite verses of the Bible, and this is just so stunning. I think people just jump over this. This is where he puts his hope. As for me, I know my Redeemer lives. A Redeemer is the one who brings us back into fellowship with something we've lost, which is ultimately God. And he will stand upon this earth. See, Job knew that Jesus Christ was coming. There was knowledge of this event 4,000 years ago, 2,000 years before it happened. Isn't that neat? God doesn't leave us in the dark. God lets us know those things that are important. Now, at the end of all that, and this is where I'm coming to the point of this morning's talk, Job is asking, why the pain? Why the suffering? Why is it happening to me? I've tried to do everything I could. I've sacrificed as required. I've worshiped as required, and on and on and on. God comes, and in the longest monologue of the creator of the entire universe to mankind, longer than Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, 3 full chapters, God answers. But he doesn't tell Job why it's happening. He does something else. And he starts by asking Job, where were you when I laid the very foundation of the very earth you're walking upon? He's starting to form a perspective for not just Job, but every one of us when we're in the midst of pain. What should our perspective be? Should it be to focus on the pain, whether it's financial, emotional, relational, whatever? Or should we be focusing elsewhere? Tell me, God asks rhetorically to Job, if you have understanding. And then he starts describing what he's done, how the laws of the universe operate, the stars he's placed in the heaven that are held together, the enormous animals. It ends with a description of what can only be a dinosaur, which Job had to have been aware of. And he describes all birds and animals and land animals and their abilities. He describes the weather cycle, all this stuff he's made. And he says, look upon these things. And at the very end, this is Job's response. And this is my jumping off point for the rest of the lecture. Job says, after God's describing who he is by describing what he has made and what he has done, Job says, I know, he's speaking to God, I know that you can do anything, and no one can stop you. Man, let that sink in. Just let it sink in. The troubles you're going through, God could have stopped them. Nobody, Satan, nobody can stop anything God wants. I had heard of you before. Okay, Job followed God. He knew about God. He'd heard about God. He'd heard about Christ coming and being our Redeemer and in later days walking upon the earth. But now, says Job, I have seen you with my own eyes. And his response, because I doubted that there was a purpose in all that you do, I sit in dust and ashes and repent. So he didn't blaspheme God. He didn't doubt God. He didn't doubt God's existence. He just questioned God's methods. And he's repenting of even doing that. Now, had God physically appeared before Job and stood there in person speaking to him, I think there's absolutely no indication of that. So what does Job mean when he says, I've seen you with my own eyes? God had described those things Job had seen with his own eyes. Now, what is that? It's what God has made. By looking at creation, we get a picture of exactly who God is, what he's capable of in his very nature and Godhead. That's repeated in Romans 1. Everybody's without excuse for belief in God by looking at what he has made and will even know his nature and his power and his Godhead by looking at creation. So here's the lessons. Oh, by the way, I got to throw this in because this is really significant to everybody around us. Help people around us understand what this is about to show you. The book ends with this. So the Lord blessed Job in the second half of his life even more than in the beginning, for now he had 14,000 sheep, twice as many, 6,000 camels, twice as many, 1,000 oxen, twice as many, 1,000 donkeys, twice as many. He had twice as much stuff. And he also gave Job 7 sons and 3 more daughters. He gave him the same amount of children, twice as much stuff, but 10 more children. Why didn't God double the children? He did double the children. That's the point. And this is so significant. See, if God had given Job 20 children, it would be as if the first 10 children never existed. They were just gone, just like all the animals, gone, never to be there again. But they're not gone. When we die, we're not gone. We're stepping through a door into a true reality of the whole universe. We're stepping into eternity, and we're going to live that eternity with God, or we're going to live that eternity separated from God, which is going to be hell. And that's what we can learn from this. That is so significant. And it's just tucked there away in this ancient book. So, this insight is phenomenal. Pain and suffering is not necessarily caused by God, but it's allowed by God. He will allow it because it's a fallen world. Trusting God during times of suffering will be rewarded. And this is that other point. This life is temporary and short, like a flash in a pan, like a mist that in the morning disappears, like a flower that fades in one day. The Bible says it in so many ways. And we're not just gone when we die. Help the people around us to know this. It's a fact. And here's the point of this morning. Focusing on God by observing what He has made. Because everything else is feelings. It's not something we can tangibly connect with. But creation, we tangibly connect with. It's like if we're a ship that's just drifting with wind blowing it to and fro, the rope that connects that boat to safety and reality is creation. And it moves us past focusing on ourselves and our problems. That's what God was doing for Job. Focus on me, and you can do it by looking at what I made, and you can have the absolute assurance that I'm there. And you can see my nature by what I've made. So now we're going to do that. And it's so sad that I'm going to give probably about 8 examples of the things God have made that are just stunningly amazing. They should have, our mouths should drop open when we see these things that God has done. And if you've never, they did for me when I'd first seen them. Now, some of them you may have seen or heard about, but they're just stunningly amazing. And it just reconnects us. It puts us past our own problems. And that's the value of these devotionals. And I'll talk about that at the end. They're reconnecting the world around us with who's behind it all. So I'm going to start with a really, really little animal. Okay? Now, this little animal is called a tardigrade. And this is a corn maze. I was out in Wisconsin. My son lives there a couple years ago in the fall, and we went to this corn maze. And they had an overhead picture. It's about a 30-acre field. It took us 2 hours to go in and out and around this whole maze looking for clues and stuff. But they decided to feature the tardigrade, and it's called the water bear. It's the smallest animal. It's not a microorganism like an amoeba or a bacteria. It's actually a little teeny animal, and it has 8 legs. Okay, it's one of the only animal, insects do, but the only animal that I know of that has 8 legs. And it's only hold your forefinger and your thumb together, okay? Get it as close as you can get it without them touching. And that's about how big that animal is. You can't even hardly hold it there. You never see it if you're actually just looking at it and it's in the water. Now, here's what it looks like. Isn't he cute? Little teddy bear. I mean, I think they ought to sell those in the toy stores to like cuddle up with at night. It's just so cute. Now, the thing about the tardigrade that is just stunning, and this only probably goes back a few decades ago, for whatever reason, they started studying it, and they decided to see, it lives underwater. Can we just take away oxygen and see how long it'll live? So they put it in a bell jar, pulled a vacuum, and the thing flops down on the floor, and they leave it in there a day and come back and put the oxygen back in, and it just stands right back up. Turns out you could send it out into outer space, leave it without oxygen for weeks or months, and it won't die. Now, that in itself is pretty cool, okay? Now, I'm going to kind of compare this with the whole evolution idea that it just made itself here in a moment. But, I mean, as far as every animal we know, from fish, who use their gills to absorb oxygen into their bloodstream, to mammals, to birds, to reptiles. These animals need oxygen. This guy doesn't. Think of the programming changes and the chemistry and all the mechanisms needed to make that happen. That isn't going to happen a step at a time. I like to say, if you take an animal that, some bird supposedly turned into a penguin, you take a bird and you throw it up in the Antarctic and you drop the temperature to -40, it isn't going to evolve the ability to become a penguin. It's going to die. All sorts of changes have to already be there for it to do this. Well, that was interesting, thought the scientists. Let's just, let's see if we want to send these guys up into outer space where they don't have any oxygen, they're going to have lots more radiation, and that's probably going to kill them. So let's irradiate it. Well, they upped the radiation level 1,000 times higher than it is here on Earth from the sun's solar radiation coming to Earth, kind of like it would be on outer space. And the guy just kind of crawls around day after day, week after week. Didn't make any difference. Didn't hurt him at all. So, wow, this is pretty cool. Must be some sort of alien creature, huh? Well, let's see if we can crush him. So they started increasing the pressure in the chamber, went from a normal pressure up to 1,000 atmospheres, 6 times greater than the deepest ocean on Earth. It would kill any animal, like way early on. He just was fine. Didn't kill him. So you can't asphyxiate him, you can't irradiate him, you can't crush him. Now, there's a lot of varieties of this guy. Now, the one I'm about to show you, here's my favorite. He's a little nastier looking, but there's another variation of a tardigrade, just like there's variations of dogs. So now here, let's try to boil him to death. So they threw him in boiling water. Now, boiling water stops at 212 degrees Fahrenheit while the water evaporates. But at 212 degrees, which is what you would do to kill bacteria and all sorts of stuff, he doesn't die. It cooled him back. He was just fine. This is a cool dude. He's like he's like the Wolverine of the X-Men. You know, you just can't kill him. Those of you who like those superhero movies, you can't dehydrate him. They found tardigrades in dry tombs that are hundreds of years old. And they've just dried out like a speck of dust. They put a drop of water on him, bloop, and he just comes right back to life. Goes into suspended animation. And last, well, let's see if we can freeze him if we can't boil him to death. They've taken him down as close as you can get to absolute zero, froze him solid, thaw him out, and he starts crawling around again. Now, obviously, you can blowtorch him and, crush him at some point, but isn't that stunning? The abilities God built into this little critter is just stunning. And none of them can be explained by a little tiny step change at a time, because it all has to be there and none of it works. The design is astounding. I bet we could spend the next 10 years studying each one of these abilities and learn all sorts of stuff from it. And that's what God's done. He's given us creation to learn useful things to help each other and to declare His glory. Now, we're going to get a little bit bigger. The sea sapphire, and by the way, you'll see dates. I've written 4 devotionals. I brought 3 of them this morning, the full color hardcover devotionals. And these examples are pages in these books. And later on, I'm going to show you a little video. I've started filming 2- and 3-minute videos where there's a little QR code on my latest book, and you can point your phone at it, and up pops a little video of me showing pictures and explaining further the stuff that's here. And this is one of them. The sea sapphire is about 1/4 of an inch long. It is this brilliant sapphire blue color, and it does something that no other living creature on the planet can do. It's absolutely, totally unique. And its design is stunning. You see, what it can do is become invisible. God created a creature with the power of invisibility. I'm serious. And we see it all the time in like the Incredibles and the Fantastic Four and all these comic books and superhero movies. The Invisible Man, a book written back in the 1800s. And I think that's probably the superpower I would choose. I mean, the last guy had the superpower of almost immortality. You couldn't hardly kill him. This one has the superpower of invisibility. Now, how? How does it do that? Turns out the sea sapphire is covered with these little scales that are at multiple levels. You got a level of scales here and a level of scales there, like a butterfly, very translucent. And when light comes and hits it, the reason we see colors is certain wavelengths are absorbed and certain wavelengths are bounced back. Well, for the sea sapphire, everything but that sapphire blue is absorbed. The blue bounces back and he looks blue. But it goes through the first layer of scales, it hits the second layer of scales, and then that's where the absorption takes place, and then the wave comes back to us. So the wavelength between those layer of scales is exactly right to allow the blue wavelength to escape and come back. But when the sea sapphire turns like this, now the light coming through has to travel a longer path between the two layers of scales. And when that happens, the blue wavelength also gets absorbed. So the light doesn't bounce back. And actually, those scales are translucent. Its body fluids are translucent. That means essentially transparent. So the light passes right through it, hits the bottom of the ocean, bounces back, goes right through it, and comes back to your eye. So the animal becomes invisible. Let me show you, it loops. There's a little clip. You're going to see it, and then it turns, and you'll see the bottom of the ocean below it, as if it's not even there. Watch what this little critter does. So there he is. He just turned. Did you see that? You're seeing the ocean below him. So he's there, and then he's not there. Isn't that stunning? God invented an animal capable of essentially becoming invisible. Light passes right through him and comes back again. But only when he turns a certain angle. Now think of the engineering. Think of the physics involved. Think of the exact placement of the scale, the exact composition of the fluids inside of the animal, the exact ability to allow light to pass by both directions, but only when it turns at a certain angle. It's stunning. The awe of a creator who could just think this stuff up and then make it happen. Because it couldn't happen a little step at a time. There's just too many variables that have to be perfect. Now let's look at the intelligence of creatures, because even those reflect the nature and the power, the Godhead of the one who made them. And we're going to look at that at a stupid little simple creature that is only good other than for making honey, which is kind of nice, is the stinging us, the honeybee. Now there he is. Now this is, again, it's one of the pages in the devotional. I forget which one. So you've got to get all three. But researchers from Princeton University, they'd known for years that bees are very, very intelligent. They're not stupid. They actually communicate with each other in a very unique way. But they wanted to find out, how quickly can they learn something? How quickly can their little brains learn something? Now, their brains are about 10,000 times smaller than ours. They've got a brain the size of a grain of sand compared to our big brains, okay, these Princeton PhDs. So they developed an experiment to see how quick can these honeybees learn something new. So they set up a series of hives, and then they radioactively marked the bees from one of the hives. Then they put a really rich source of nectar 200 feet away from the hive in a certain direction, and they opened up the hive, and they started a stopwatch to see, well, actually, let me get it right. They waited until one of the bees from that hive, because they had a detector, got to the source of nectar. Then they started the stopwatch. And they timed how long it took for that bee to go back to the hive, tell the other bees where the food was, and then have those bees come and find the food. It took about 10 minutes, which stunned them. It wasn't in the report, but I'm sure it did. That's stunning. It went back, communicated, and brought its friends within 10 minutes. Well, how did it tell its friends? And here's the first example of how absurd evolution is. Okay, that bee, and they figured this out clear back in the 1960s, that bee goes back into that hive, and it starts wiggling its butt. Okay, it's just doing this little dance and wiggling its butt while all the other bees are watching it. And researchers noticed this. Why does that bee wiggling the butt while the other bees are just watching it? It's called a bee dance. Well, this is what it's doing. Once it finds a flower, it comes back to the nest, and then it lines itself up, orients itself up with one of the directions of the honeycombs, and the distance from where the sun is at that moment to where the flower is the same angle as it is from the two angles of the honeycomb. So it dances in the direction that tells them what direction to fly. And then it goes around in a number of circles that tells them approximately how far to fly. So it not only tells them where to go, it tells them how long it's going to take them to get there. So they watch the little dance, and then they all go find the source of food. Pretty cool, huh? Now, how's that going to happen by evolution? Now think about it. If evolution's true, at some time in the past, these bees didn't have the ability to communicate in this way. So suppose a bee named George, he flies out and finds a flower, flies back to the nest, and he gets down there and he starts wiggling his butt while the other bees are watching him. They're going to say, George is having an epileptic fit. They're not going to know what he's telling them. They're not going to have a clue. They're not going to have any reason to think it's anything. It makes no sense unless they are programmed to know that action has a meaning. It's all creation, and it's so obvious. It couldn't just happen. Things don't just happen. Communication doesn't happen. Language doesn't happen. These bees have a language. So the researchers then, they moved the food source 300 feet away, 150 plus 150, 300 feet away. Waited till a bee showed up, started the stopwatch. That bee went back, told the others, they came, and again, it was 10 minutes. So it wasn't twice as long. They thought, oh, this is interesting. They moved it 450 foot away. A bee finds it. They start the stopwatch. They wait, and then all of a sudden there's a bunch of bees around there with that radioactive marker. It took, again, 10 minutes. Wow, they're thinking, wonder how far away we can get, and they'll still keep coming that quick. So they pick up their food source. They move it to it's 600 feet away. They turn on their radioactive marker, and there's a swarm of bees from that hive waiting for them to show up with the honey. Stunningly awesome. The little sand of brain outsmarted the Harvard or the Princeton researchers. They saw the pattern, they saw the distance, and they said, well, we're not going to wait. We'll just go wait for you. What God has created is just so unbelievably marvelous. Okay, one more example, then we're going to take our break. Now, I've been writing specifically on creation. My oldest book is coming up on 24 years old. I've written or co-authored 8 books. 4 of them are devotionals. My designer, about a year ago, she said, Bruce, you got to start producing little short videos. Young people, they're not going to watch an hour-long show. You need to take some of these stuff in these books and make in little 2-minute videos. So we did. I flew her in from Springfield, that's where she works, Missouri, up to Midland, and we spent the weekend, and we filmed 40 of them in one weekend. And it takes her a couple weeks to blend each one with video and footage and animation and stuff. And now there's 60 of them posted. Ultimately, I hope to have hundreds of them. And what I'm doing, every time I republish one of my devotionals, I add a little QR code that links the page to a video people can watch. And there's about 30 of them in that newest devotional, Without Excuse. Now, I want to show you one. The next example I'm going to talk about is a slug. You know, what use are slugs? Not a lot. They're slimy, they're ugly, and they're slow. But everything God made has a purpose. So I want to show you one of these little videos, and I'm not sure this computer is on the internet, but let's see if it is. If it is, nope, okay. Bear with me, because I really want you to watch one of these, because you get a feel for how useful they are. Okay, may need some help. Let's see, guest. Okay, shout out again, what is the code to get on? Okay. All right, see if that works. Yes. Okay, we're connected. I'm just going to take you to, I had this all linked up on my computer, but obviously that didn't work. So it would have been a direct link. So it'll take you to my website, which is searchforthetruth.net. Huh. Okay. I think it's going, yeah, there it is. Okay, and on the home page, right at the beginning of the home page, and this is in the front of all my books too, you'll see the Without a Doubt devotionals. They're little 2-minute, 3-minute videos on not having any doubt in your mind that God is there and that He's real and He cares. So I'm going to hit the watch now, and it goes to a list of all these videos on YouTube. Okay. Slowly. Okay. And I'm just going to hit play all, and I got to go down in the list. As I said, I was all ready to do this. I think it's like number 17 I want to show you. 17 or 19. There it is, number 20. Okay, so we're going to show you what these look like. Okay, can you bring the sound up? Oh, bummer. We're not going to be able to do this. Oh, yes, we are. We got the expert here.
So we need to pause this.
Okay, we're paused.
And then we need to...
Oh, I need to pull this down, don't I?
Right.
Okay, here we go. Oh, I need to pull this down, don't I?
Right.
Okay, here we go.
Oh, hold on. Because now I got to send it. Oh, it is sorry screen. Okay.
Okay, here we go. So this is about the slug. It's another one of those just stunning things God has done. Okay, let me see if I can bring my sound up. I'm all the way up 100%. Bummer. No sound. I can sort of hear it. That's really weird. Okay, well, let me just talk you through it. So here's a slug. You know, they leave a kind of a slime trail as they walk along. Okay.
Oh, it is going the right way. I thought that was a problem right there.
Well, I would hold the microphone up against the computer, but there's no sound coming out of the computer either.
I could change that.
Oh, this is what I do on the missions field, because I run into everything over there. We'll just hold the microphone next to the computer. Where's it coming out?
You know, God told us to take dominion over.
Bring my microphone up. It's not real
Genesis.
loud.
That means to study, understand, and control it. Now, why? Because we can learn.
Bring it up more.
I mean, we can even learn from a slug. A slug, you say? Yeah. It turns out that there's a certain kind of slug that lives in northern Europe that slugs, when they move, they leave a slime trail. It's just kind of a sticky, gooey, watery thing. You can actually see their trail as they're crawling along. Well, scientists started to study this slug from Europe, and they realized their slime is very, very elastic, which means you can stretch it and it'll snap back, and very, very sticky. Now, for years, scientists have used things like super glue to bind up wounds. And they thought, it's a little toxic and it turns a little brittle. What we need is a really flexible glue that will stay sticky. And they discovered this slug slime and thought, these has the perfect characteristics for glue. Now, don't get too excited about, having some slug slime slapped onto your cut, because it takes a lot of slugs to form enough slime to fit the market. And, slug slime farms aren't exactly practical, because the slugs only exude this kind of slime when they're scared, because they don't want birds. Like if a bird's flying overhead, out comes the sticky slug slime glue. And if the bird comes and tries to pull the slug off the sidewalk, it's stuck to the sidewalk. So the only way to get the sticky glue is to scare the slugs. And slug slime farms aren't exactly practical. I mean, you set up a movie theater, you put all your slugs on the seats, and you show them movies of scary birds, and then you scrape the slug slime sticky glue off the seats. I mean, not exactly practical. So what do? They figured out how to synthesize it. And we now have the formula for sticky slug slime glue that is currently being used to seal up wounds. Isn't that cool? Because we figured out what God did first. So we can learn from creation, develop products that benefit us in a multitude of ways, even slug slime glue. What a slugger of an idea.
So, the point, and these come out like once every couple weeks, and you'll get an email if you subscribe, and is just forward this kind of stuff to people to watch, to keep that reminder that God's behind it all in front of everybody. Now, let's see if I can get back to. Actually, I think I'm probably 2/3, 3/4 through the presentation. I've got about 5, 6 more examples of really, really cool animals, and they're going to get bigger and more marvelous as we go along. But let's take our break. I know we're going to have some other people come up, and then we'll come back to it.
Just one quick announcement. If you're interested in volunteering at the Mount St. Helens Creation Center, please see Bill Hosch. Bill is with us this morning. Would you want to stand again very briefly, Bill? There's Bill, easy to spot. So let's take a break.
While everybody's settling in, I want to mention a couple things because I always seem to forget at the end. On the resource table, there are some bookmarks that have a little QR code that take you to my website and feature a couple of the most impactful videos that I've done. One by Dr. John Sanford on genetics and how everything is deteriorating. Nothing is increasing in complexity and improving as we look at the genetic code of animals. The other deals with soft tissue and dinosaurs. And those two issues, I think, really just stunningly have the ability to wake people up, that evolution is not behind everything. There's also a page that just shows a bunch of really cool animal pictures with these little codes. Those link to these little 2- and 3-minute videos. And just grab one of those and start putting these to use with people. Now, let's jump into some more of these really cool, awesome animals. And by the way, lest I forget, thank you so much to the tech crew and the others who have helped get this whole thing working. I mean, I was stressed big time. We went through 3 computers to get one that would show my presentation. Nothing like spending hours and hours on a visual presentation and standing up in front of 200 people and having nothing to show them. So thank you again. Now, this is the example. And I'm going to give you kind of an aside because someone asked me to do this. As I go into the foreign schools, because in America, it's been 6 years since any public school teacher has asked me or allowed me to come and speak at any university or school. And even the Christian groups often see creation as a side issue. Let's concentrate on Christ. And yet Jesus said to Nicodemus, if you don't believe me when I tell you of worldly things, how will you believe me when I tell you of spiritual things? And that's what's going on. The Bible's been discredited when it talks about biology and geology and history. So how credible is it about spiritual stuff? And we see the consequence all around us. But the foreign schools aren't like that. I've now been to 4 nations. Fiji, we've spoken in essentially every public high school in an entire nation. And every student we spoke to, and it was 68,000 students, received one of those full color hardcover devotionals. And it's often the only book they own other than the Bible. So they're connecting the Bible to reality. And I think it's going to impact long-term the thinking of this kid, the future adults in that nation. We've been to the Philippines twice. We've been to Vanuatu twice. COVID shut us down for almost 2 years. This spring, we went to Peru, shipped 8,000 books down, and spoke to about 4,000 students in almost 10 high schools. I had assemblies, public arenas, auditoriums that opened up to folks just in little cities. And we're this coming year, we have 4 trips planned. I'll be going to Jamaica in February. We're going to the Cook Islands in June. We're going back to Peru with 20,000 books in 3 teams of teachers in October, and back to the Philippines in November. And it's donations that pay for all these books and these trips. And we're impacting the thinking of literally hundreds of thousands of students in connecting reality to the Bible. And this is one of the examples I always give to these students, because especially in the Pacific, they live in these areas near the ocean. And these students, because they're not, oh, I've heard it, I've seen it, I've heard about creation stuff in church, they don't have this ho-hum attitude. As I show them what I'm about to show you, I will literally hear the air going sucked as they go, oh, and they see it. They're just stunned. And this is one of those things that God does to get that response from us, to return us to this awe of who He is by looking at what He's made. And it's a stupid little, not very colorful, not very big, nothing special about it. It looks like he's got a black eye where someone's punched him in the head fish. And he's called the oopu fish. Now, this fish only lives one place in the entire world, this particular species of this fish. He's part of a group of fish called the goby fish, but he's very, very special. He lives only off the island of Hawaii. And we were over there a few years ago, and they had a billboard about this fish, and I thought that would make a great page in the devotional. And it turned out to be a great example wherever I go to speak to these students. Well, it turns out this fish is like a salmon. It lives in salt water, but it has to lay its eggs in fresh water. Salmons, you all know this, they swim in from the ocean up the Columbia River. Well, this fish lives in the Pacific Ocean, and there's no freshwater source where it lives, except for one. There is a 420-foot waterfall that plunges water into a pool, and the ocean's like right out here. So it then comes out of this pool and runs into the ocean. If the fish lay their eggs here, the eggs are going to get flushed into the salt water, and they're going to die. If the fish lays its eggs in the ocean, they're going to be in salt water, they're going to die. The only way for it to have a next generation is for the fish to lay its eggs upstream of this waterfall. Okay? And there's no other source. And it's the only place the fish lives. And I asked the students, kind of lost it again. Not sure what happened. Let me back up. Okay, it'll come back on. Okay. You really need to see the pictures. Hang on. Should I unplug it and plug it back in? Tell me what you want me to do. Stop the slideshow? So I need to close it down. I don't understand. Escape. Escape? Okay. Okay. Let's start right there. Thank you. Again, I thank you for your expertise. So I asked the students, well, how do you think it gets up there? And they're not shy and timid like American students who are afraid of what everybody's going to think if they shout something out. And I always hear a student shout out, maybe it flies, because they've heard of flying fish. And I say, well, yeah, there are flying fish, but they don't fly. They just have fins that spread out a little further. They can jump out of the water and they can glide. And they can glide 100 feet or more, but they never get more than about 10 feet above the water. They're not going to fly 400 feet up a waterfall. It doesn't work. There are no such fish. So then someone will often shout out, well, maybe it climbs. And I said, oh, really? Kind of like, Spider-Man? Got a superhero fish with little fingers. And all the students will laugh. But then I'll say, well, you're kind of on the right track, but you've got the wrong movie. Because they've all watched the American movies, okay? They say, instead of Spider-Man, there's a movie called Mission Impossible, where the hero, he has these suction cup fingers and he climbs up the tower in Dubai in the middle of the movie on the glass panels. And that's what this fish does. You see, on the bottom of the fish, there are two of its fins that are fused together, and they form a suction cup. And that fish literally goes and runs against the wall, whoop, and then it shoves with its back fins and pushes up and attaches and pushes up and attaches and pushes up and attaches. And over a 2-day period, it will climb a 420-foot waterfall, jump into the water, swim upstream, and lay its eggs. And they'll hatch, and they'll grow into little fishlings, and then they'll get flushed down the waterfall into the ocean and go through their life cycle. But if they didn't have the ability to climb up that waterfall, there would be no next generation. So how does evolution explain this? I mean, do you have this random occurrence where two perfectly formed functioning fins fuse together to form a perfectly shaped suction cup? And the little baby looks down and says, "Mama, what's this thing on my stomach? What do I do with it?" "Well, son, see that waterfall? You go slam yourself against the wall and then you climb to the top so that, you can meet a girl and lay eggs." Well, there's no girls up there. You got to have a male and a female. It's absurd. The whole belief that little gradual changes, if it didn't need the suction cup, it would be of no use. It would be a detriment. If it did need the suction cup, it would die before it knew how to use it, or it evolved. It all has to be there at once. God does these things so that we will know, not just believe or hope or wonder, but know that he exists and have that confidence that he's behind it all. Now, I do have one more video I'd forgotten about. And again, I like to use this overseas where they're on the island nations. But it's a fish that's called the world's greatest artist. Michelangelo was the greatest human artist. The narrator of this little film calls this Japanese pufferfish the world's greatest artist. So I'm going to pull off my microphone again, and we're going to show this little video of what this fish does. And again, when I would get to the kind of the climax where the camera pans back, the whole sometimes 1,000 kids sitting outside under like a sports arena awning, they would all just gasp as they saw what this fish was capable of making. But just watch this little video, because there's an important teaching point involved too. Whoops. Okay. You know what? Because I don't have my computer, we're going to skip past this one. But you could watch the Without a Doubt videos and you can see this little video. But basically, this fish, it takes a week, 24 hours a day for 7 days, pushing around little grains of sand, and it creates this perfect circular sculpture at the bottom of the ocean. And if there's the current's moving, it's constantly pushing everything back where it wants it to be. And it's got all these beautiful ridges. It looks like a gorgeous wall hanging, and it's about 6 foot in diameter. So you have a little 6-inch fish creating a perfect circular 6-foot diameter underwater sculpture that's gorgeously beautiful. And then the female will come and they'll lay their eggs in the middle of it. And that would be like a human being. It's 6 inches tall. We're 6 feet tall, creating a sculpture about 60 foot in diameter. With our heads by shoving around a pile of dirt. And we would never be able to do it. We'd never be able to make it perfect circular. We'd never be able to keep it in shape to make it, but this fish does it. And the narrator at the end showing this fish do this, and I'm going to go back to the picture of the fish, okay? His name's David Edinburgh. He does all these nature films. He's an atheist evolutionist. He says, after showing this beautiful sculpture under the ocean, if this doesn't get him noticed, nothing will, in his English accent. The implication being, the reason this fish does this beautiful work of art is so he can attract a babe, and they can have eggs and get them fertilized. And the more beautiful it is, the better he's going to attract it. Now, that's where I want to jump off and do a little bit of teaching. Charles Darwin developed this idea that one animal slowly modified by random change. If the change was useful, it would slowly change into a different kind of an animal. But there's one thing during his time, he never had an adequate answer to, and that was, why does beauty exist? What function does beauty have? And this is a statement by Charles Darwin. He said, The sight of the feather in a peacock's tail whenever I gaze at it makes me sick. Charles Darwin wrote thousands of letters to other scientists over a 20-year period trying to convince them that evolution explained everything, because it wasn't immediately accepted. And in many of these letters, he said his goal was to kill God. That was Charles Darwin's goal, because his daughter had died at a young age. He looked around and he reasoned, oh, the rocks and the fossils are filled with death. Death's always been around. If God made everything, God made death. God's responsible for evil. God's responsible for cancer. God just made that thing's way because things have been around for millions of years. God doesn't even exist. I've got to come up with another idea for where everything came from that leaves God out, killing God in people's thinking. That's the man we worship as Charles Darwin in our schools. They don't get to hear about that. Well, if you look at a peacock's tail, it's gorgeous. Why is it so beautiful? Darwin struggled with that. Well, people following him came up with the idea that beauty is there because it has a function. Flowers are beautiful because the colors attract insects. Well, guess what? Insects are colorblind. So that turns out not to be true, although it's been repeated over and over and over again. Or, peacocks are beautiful. The male's so beautiful, so it can attract a female. The more beautiful, the more it attracts. Well, guess what? About 20 years ago, they tested this. And there's a scientific, in my book, I document the source. But they took a male peacock and they cut off all those beautiful feathers, all those iridescent eyes. They just cut them off. So this guy is pug ugly. Okay? This is one ugly peacock. Then they sent him out into a field with a whole bunch of really beautiful peacocks, and then they sent in the peahens, the females. It didn't make a bit of difference which one they chose. Beauty had nothing to do with it. Beauty exists because it reflects the nature of the one who made everything. That's why it's there. Now, occasionally it does have a functional purpose, but there's all sorts of times it doesn't make sense. The next animal, now we're getting bigger. This sea iguana, marine iguana, he's about 5 foot long. He is a big critter, okay? Now, he lives on an island in the South Pacific surrounded by sharks. The coral reef, and then right in amongst it are these sharks, okay? And he has to get his food out of the ocean. Now, sharks have terrible eyesight, but they have really good hearing. This guy has a really big heart. It's like, boom, 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 boom. That's what it sounds like underwater, okay? The shark can just tune right in on it. So the marine iguana, it goes out into the ocean, goes swimming. George and Frank are sitting there, and George, our iguana, swims out, and all of a sudden a shark oh man, this is better than a bratwurst. Just whomp. Good, juicy meal in one gulp. No more George. And Frank's thinking, oh my goodness, my brother just got eaten by a shark. But I'm hungry. I got to go get something to eat. What am I going to do? That shark's going to hear my heart. He does what no other animal in the world can do. There's no ancestor. There's no link to some other critter. This animal turns its heart off. It shuts off its heart. Then it swims for up to 20 minutes with no heartbeat. Down there swimming around. Now it's just sounding like the water swishing back and forth instead of boom, 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 boom. And then it gets its food, crawls back up onto the shore, and it died because it didn't have the ability to turn its heart back on. No. It just turns its heart right back on. Now, imagine there's an iguana that, they're getting eaten, and somehow it's an advantage to not have a heartbeat because it's going to survive while it goes to eat. There's probably thousands of programming changes needed to the DNA code to have an animal at will be able to shut off its heart. I mean, it has to have the ability for its muscles to continue to work without oxygen moving around, without blood taking that oxygen to the muscles. It has to have the ability for the lungs to not be doing what they would normally do. And then it has to have the ability to at will turn the heart back on. Thousands of programming changes. And they all have to be there or none of them work. And the animal dies. And how does it even know to do this? It's never going to happen by a random little tiny step at a change. These are stunning things that God has created with no ancestor. It's just there. Because God wants us to know what the truth is and know his ability and his power. Now, there's just a couple more. This is my favorite bird because it's not called the bar-tailed evolution wit. And there's a reason. Only God can explain what this bird is capable of doing. Now, it turns out the godwit spends its summers in Alaska where there is a smorgasbord of food available. When it warms up, the plankton breed, the whales head up there, the seabirds head up there. It's just it's a fat fest of food for about 4, 5, 6 months. Well, guess what? Alaska's not a great place to live for most birds and animals in the winter. So this bird is a snowbird. It flies south, except it only goes to the island of New Zealand. And it turns out that's a 7,000-mile flight over open ocean. Now, if you look at this bird, it's got these long spindly legs. It's built to run along the seashore and grab little critters as the waves wash in and out. It literally doesn't swim. Whoops, I went the wrong way. So if it lands in the ocean, it's going to drown. It's not going to be able to take back off again. It's not like a duck or a seagull. It's a land bird. So now science is really, I love science. I'm a scientist. I've studied it and used it all my life. It's helped me invent 17 different patented new products for Dow. It's a tool to study creation. And God basically told us to do that. When he said, take dominion over creation to the first human beings, that ancient word means to study and understand and control. That is science. We're told to do science. Well, scientists discovered that these birds, they know every time they flap their wings how many calories it takes. They know how many calories are contained in a little gram of fat. They know how much fat are on these birds. And they discovered that it is absolutely impossible for this bird to fly from Alaska to New Zealand. It doesn't have enough energy. It can't get there. It's going to get partway there and land in the ocean. But guess what? It does. Well, that's a scientific mystery, so they started studying it. Well, turns out it takes them between 5 and 7 days of nonstop 24 hours a day flapping their wings. They stop flapping, they're going to land in the ocean. Well, in order to do this, for the last 2 to 3 weeks while they're in Alaska, they gorge themselves at the smorgasbord. They eat and eat and eat until their weight goes up 55%. It'd be like a 180-pound man 2 weeks later weighing 270 pounds. Okay? Except now they look like the Goodyear blimp. And they don't fly as fast, and they're not as aerodynamic, and they're still going to crash into the ocean, even though they've got a lot more food. So what do? They take all that normal kind of squishy, watery fat, their body eliminates the water, and they turn it into like a beef tallow, a real concentrated kind of fat that doesn't have the water. But they're still too big and blubbery, even when they do that. So right before they take off, they flatten all of their internal organs. Their liver, their kidneys, their intestines, their stomachs, they all become paper thin. So now the fat fills in that space. They can burn that fat over the next 7 days of continuous flight. They're streamlined, and they can make it all the way there. Isn't that stunning? Did you hear all the things I described to make this possible? They've got to be able to eat that much without continuing to expand their bodies rapidly and shortly. They've got to be able to eliminate all that water from the fat, and they've got to be able to shrivel up their organs. And then they've got to know where to go, because the young do the same thing that were born that year, and they've never been there. And they still know how to get 7,000 miles away to exactly the right spot. It's stunning what God has created for us to see and know that he exists. And I want to end with this one, because it's just kind of fun. When I was growing up, we didn't have those little light sticks where you can break them and they can create light. It's called chemiluminescence, two chemicals that mix together, and when they mix, they make light. Now, just a little bit of trivia. The two chemicals, once we discovered what those chemicals were that made that light, they're called luciferine and luciferase. And the guy that named them, the chemist who figured out what they were, chemically analyzed it and just kind of reproduced them. Notice what the root word is. What is it that both those chemicals are named after? Lucifer, who is also called the angel of light in the Bible. Isn't that interesting? It's got a biblical origin. Well, these chemicals only work if they're separated and protected because they're fairly fragile organic chemicals, and exposed to oxygen, they'll oxidize and not work right. So they're kept in special chambers, and then they have to be mixed in the right proportions in exactly the right way, kind of in their own little translucent chamber so the light gets out. And that's not even the most amazing thing. All the different critters all over the world, and there's about 30 different classifications of biological organisms that use chemiluminescent light and create it. They don't all use the same variations and forms of luciferine and luciferase. They're different chemicals. They just have the same root ability. So they couldn't have all evolved from the same common source. So you had to have 30 different groups of organisms across the entire planet, all independently evolving the ability to create light in a completely different time periods and in different ways throughout time. And we can't even explain it once. And this is just a few examples. These are jellyfish that create this beautiful blue light as they float underwater. There are little microorganisms. It's a different chemical, but it also puts out the blue wavelength. This isn't lights on a seashore. These are plankton that when they crash into the seashore, the force of the water bouncing them against the sand activates their ability to put these two chemicals together, and they glow in a blue light. I'd love to be on that seashore. The waves crash, and all of a sudden, blue light flashes across the water. Mushrooms in the forest, green. Wouldn't that be fun? The Amazon forest, you're walking along, and what's that green over there? And there's a whole bunch of green glowing mushrooms. There are squid that don't just create one light, they do a light show like a billboard with green and blue and orange lights flashing in patterns across their back. Each different color coming on and coming off and flashing to create patterns and colors underneath the water. There are fish that live 20,000 feet below the surface of the ocean where no light can reach, total darkness. And by the way, we find fish down there with color. What function does that serve? God knew, because he's outside of time, that mankind would eventually explore every nook and crevice of this creation on earth that he created. And he put surprises for us in every place imaginable. Color, 20,000 feet below the surface, and fish that have a light bulb on a stalk. And they turn on the light bulb, and the other fish are thinking, ooh, wonder what that is. And he has supper, waiting. And then the one that we're all most familiar with are lightning bugs. Now, here's where I'm going to wrap up. Remember, we do live in a fallen world. Jesus said, in this world, you will have trials. Not maybe. You're going to have problems. People are going to lie about you. They're going to be untrustworthy. They're going to insult you. Don't take offense. Forgive them. You're going to have diseases. Unfair things are going to happen. But our life is just such a flash. And we serve a God that can put a light bulb on the butt of a bug. I mean, think about it. He's so creative. He's so in charge of everything. He takes care of every bird in the air. God values three things above everything else. As I read Scripture, I see it coming up over and over and over again. He values our trust, which leads to faith and trust. And he values obedience, and he rewards it. And he allows us to grow our faith and our trust by not giving us a perfect life where nothing ever happens, but trust him to be there. If God can put a light bulb on the butt of a bug, he can take care of you. And then we need to be that light. And I'm going to end with this scripture. Those of us who have the Lord's Spirit, because we've accepted what Jesus did for us personally, and that's what we've got to do. We can't earn our way into creation and into salvation. We are the children of the light. That's what God is telling us. We're the children of the day. We don't belong living in worrying about this and worrying about that and living in fear and sequestering ourselves and hiding from problems. That's the darkness. We are to bring the light into the darkness. Let us live in the light and be clear-headed. Let's be protected by the armor of faith and love and wear our helmet of confidence. Well, there it is, trust and faith of salvation. So that's kind of the ending message. It's not just about creation. It's about that trusting the one who is behind creation. And we live in a world, bring us full circle back, where the tour guides of this world, they have skill, they are convincing, they are personable, they are authoritative, they're the teachers, the professors, the textbook writers, but they're living in darkness because they've been blinded to the truth. They think they're teaching the truth, but they're teaching the exact opposite. And they're working overtime to convince our children, our friends, our neighbors, people that are filling the churches that the Bible can't be trusted. It doesn't mean what it says. There really isn't a creator. Evolution's our creator. And then God isn't that important. That's the message that's being preached all around us by the tour guides of the world. And we need to have the same absolute anger we would have as the child of Michelangelo. And the motivation to teach those other people in the tour group that they're being lied to, that you would have if that your dad was being lied about. And he is. Our Father, who is God, is being lied about. That's what all these resources are about, by the way. I know you're familiar with the devotionals. I really want to mention the DVD sets. I spent 4 years and $150,000 filming an 18-part series on creation. This lecture is a new one. It'll be on one of the next 6 that I'm working on. But it covers all about the rocks and the dinosaur tissue and the genetics and biology and astronomy. And it's the same visual stuff that I do when I speak and talk, except it's filmed on location. I did the Columbia River Valley and the Missoula flood and talked about how that shows the impact the global flood would have had. And do an episode at the Grand Canyon and at Mount St. Helens and at Mount Rushmore and in science museums. If you want to be part of impacting people's thinking, buy a set of these. All 9 videos plus 1 book would be $70. Donate them to your church. Go and sit down with your youth pastor and say, you know your kids are getting a non-biblical worldview in their schooling and in their education and all around them. Use this as a curriculum one of your years in your youth group because it's interesting and visual and it's filmed on location and it's filled with animation and drone footage and nature footage. But it connects everything back to God. And you can be part of impacting the thinking of dozens of other kids. So think about that as a Christmas gift to your church and put it to use, or put it to use with your grandkids. And thank you so much. I do want to end with the last couple slides. The value of those devotionals, the value of those little 2-minute videos, the value of even one of these Rocks Cry Out is that it puts truth in front of people and it connects the Bible to reality and it actually provides some evidence. It's not just a religious opinion. There's evidence to support what the Bible has to say. And it's like putting a pebble in someone's shoe. It's not necessarily going to make them stop wearing their shoe. It's not going to instantly necessarily convert them to wanting to accept Christ as their Savior. But when you put truth in front of someone, they have to deal with it. And if you can do it in a visual, interesting way, and everybody's interested in nature, and whenever I hand out any of the devotionals, I always tell people, you know, this is all about really cool things in nature. At least read the day that's on your birthday. Nobody can resist reading what's on their birthday. And it just gets them started. And the without a doubt, little short videos do the same thing, sending them to people. That creation curriculum does the same thing. The devotionals do the same thing. And before you know it, God will use it. And then he'll use someone else putting another pebble, and someone else putting another pebble. And before you long, you got so many rocks on your shoe you can't walk in it. And that's the value. Just get truth in front of people, put resources, mine and others, to use, and then let God work. But always do it in a loving way. Not, I know more than you, you're wrong. Just make it winsome and interesting and visual. And thank you for having me.